Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth annual OneEastside Economic Outlook Summit. My name is Christina Hudson, and I am CEO of One Redmond and founding partner of OneEastside, and I will be your host for today's event. We have a great program lined up for you this morning. Today, you will hear the tale of two pandemic recoveries. From High Peak Strategy, we have Dr. Spencer Cohen, who will share data around the national and local trends, along with specific intel about our 23 cities and towns in East King County. All of this data will give us unique insight to our outlook for the next year. Next, from our Puget Sound Business Journal, we'll have the new market president and publisher, Don Baker. He's going to be moderating a fireside discussion with Microsoft, OneUp Ventures, Zell's Famous Chicken, Eastside for All, and Meta Reality Labs Research. And I am very much looking forward to this vibrant discussion later on in the program. But before we begin, I'd like to recognize the 23 cities and towns that make up our East King County. And next, I would like to go ahead and recognize our sponsors, our founding investors, Microsoft, the City of Redmond, Nelson Legacy Group, our supporting sponsor, Business Health Trust. BHT is our partner in providing discounted health insurance and employee benefit programs. And our media sponsor, Puget Sound Business Journal. And I also want to mention our contributing partners, the Eastside Chambers. I'd like to thank all of you for the work that you are doing in helping delivering services to our communities. Thank you all for your support. And now I'd like to begin with a message from King County Executive Dow Constantine.
Good morning, everyone. I am thrilled to be here today to help launch the OneEastside Economic Outlook Summit. Working alongside our 23 Eastside cities and towns, there is a lot to celebrate and a lot to look forward to in the year ahead. Part of what's to come is transitioning to the next phase of our COVID response as a government and as employers. Earlier this month, we announced that our vaccine verification program would end on March 1st, allowing restaurants and other businesses to decide how to best ensure safety and health for their patrons and staff. We're also beginning our return to the office, and I know many other employers are as well. The pandemic has changed the way people work, and I know many organizations are going to be remote for a long time to come, but it's exciting to be able to safely have people gathered again. That recovery is built on the hard work of our entire region. Public, private, small and large organizations have all worked together and helped get our community through the worst of the pandemic. And as we move to the next phase of the COVID response and recovery, I am confident that organizations like yours will continue to help lead the way. So, thank you again to OneEastside and One Redmond for your partnership in that recovery, and to all of you for joining us here today. I'm looking forward to working with all of you as King County and our entire region moves forward together.
Thank you, Dow, for that warm welcome. OneEastside was formed during the pandemic to actively connect our chambers and cities, to help us collectively maximize resources and align priorities. And through this effort, we have seen the ability to leverage the economy of scales for our communities. And now, through this unique partnership, OneEastside has become a robust nexus for information and resources that is used by small businesses and nonprofits throughout East King County, across the state and beyond. And last year at this very event, we announced the creation of OneEastside Spark. This is a regional center for resilience and innovation. This program is funded for 1 year through a $500,000 grant from the United States Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration. And we were actually one of the few organizations to be granted EDA dollars in our region, and we are very thankful that we were offered this opportunity to help so many. Through the OneEastside Spark, we offer a variety of resources and opportunities, and you'll see a few of them here on this slide. Through our work, we have fortified our small businesses and nonprofits with the resources, the expertise, and advisory support to sustain their businesses, to get poised for resiliency, and to withstand future economic crises. On this slide, you will see some of the programming we have coming up in the next month. But next, I want to briefly share with you what we've actually been able to accomplish in 9 short months. And fortunately, we were able to ramp up very quickly to meet what was an overwhelming need for services. In our first 9 months, we have worked with over 1,400 program participants. We've had 787 unique organizations and helped support over 50,000 jobs. With an intentional support to women and minority-owned businesses, we've been able to reach 34% of our businesses are from minority-owned businesses, and we have our 51% of our advising clients are from women-owned businesses. And all our webinars are on our website for viewing on demand. And this combined with our new knowledge base that features articles written by experts and allows users to search by category and keyword. This is all designed so business owners can find what they need when they need it. And so far, we have received a great response as our videos on YouTube have seen tens of thousands of views, and we have well over 400 subscribers. And also through OneEastside Spark, we provide advisors at no cost to our small businesses, and they have covered topics related to taxes, accounting, marketing, pricing strategies, inventory control, and more. And we did learn quickly, though, that many of our business owners from our historically underserved populations needed in-language assistance and translations. And because we have this OneEastside platform, last year we were able to launch a couple of pilot programs. One was a program that was focused on the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan. We hosted a webinar that reviewed the program and application, and that featured simultaneous interpretations in 7 different languages. Also, toward the end of last year, we piloted a 2-month program with targeted two-month program that targeted in-language support to the Korean and Arabic communities in partnership with Big Hug Washington State, the Korean Association, and Mohammed Akhmush. And of course, collaboration with our regional partners is one of the keys to success for this program. OneEastside Spark has had the opportunity to be at the apex of regional projects like our PPE distributions throughout East King County Public Health Communications, Flex Fund conversations, and more. And in working with all these organizations, we have been able to identify some of the top challenges that our small businesses are facing today. Funding to sustain operations and rent, yes, that's still a top concern. Inventory and supply chain issues, retaining and rebuilding their customer base, translated materials and in-language services, cybercrime and theft, and of course, staffing and labor shortages as we're seeing throughout our region. And as designed, OneEastside Spark is regularly reevaluating our programs and the offerings and pivoting those to address new challenges. As staffing shortages have been an ongoing and critical hurdle in our businesses, we wanted to develop a vehicle to aggregate these job opportunities and also to provide us with insights on our workforce needs. And today, I'd like to announce the upcoming launch of the OneEastside Job Board. Here you'll be able to see at a glance the job openings in each of our targeted sectors. You will find jobs listed by type and location. And also there are links to our other community and East King County Chamber job boards. That'll be launching next week, so more information to come on that. And now I would like to introduce one of our amazing community business organizations and nonprofit clients to talk about her experience with Spark. Please welcome Angie Hinojos from Centro Cultural Mexicano. Angie?
Thank you, Christina, and good morning. At Centro Cultural Mexicano, our focus is the health, education, financial stability, and empowerment of our community. We provide bilingual services, including supports for small businesses, rent assistance, and access to pandemic-related resources. As a member of the Washington State Commission on Hispanic Affairs and the State Pandemic After Action Review Task Force, I am honored to represent community and business concerns at the state level. Centro Cultural Mexicano is thrilled with the programs that OneEastside Spark provides for small businesses and nonprofits. We have been able to access complementary services like advice from tax specialists on the employee retention credit to help us better understand federal requirements. We appreciate the OneEastside Spark resource pages where we can refer business and nonprofits to a robust list of funding opportunities. In fact, we were a finalist in the BECU People Helping People Awards and received a grant from them, and we found that grant on the OneEastside Spark funding opportunities page. We look forward to continuing our work to support a diversity of small businesses with innovative programs in partnership with OneEastside. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. And I want to give a big thank you to you and your team for all the work that you've done to support our community. It's been phenomenal. Thank you so much, Angie.
Thank you.
So next, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Spencer Cohen from High Peak Strategy. Spencer is a recognized expert on regional economic analysis, port economic impacts, U.S.-China trade and economic relations, China's economy, industry clusters, and international trade. He's also done quite a bit of work recently with our local cities and with the Washington Technology Industry Association. So please welcome our next speaker, Dr. Spencer Cohen.
Hi, Christina. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. It's been a real pleasure to present my perspective on the OneEastside region and talk about an economic outlook. So for today's talk, I'll be talking about US and international trends over the past year and how those trends were shaken but are in the process of recovering. I'll also talk a bit about inflation, as that's a big issue of concern, as well as supply chain disruptions and the connection between the two. Then we'll go deep into OneEastside economic performance and trends and outlook over time, and talk about economic recovery, and really to that theme about the sort of a tale of two recoveries. So what have been the impacts on the pandemic for different types of constituents and businesses and communities? So firstly, just looking nationally and internationally, we know that in 2020 was a very difficult year for the globe. Global economy contracted by about 3.1%. China was the only major economy in the world that actually experienced anything in positive territory for growth. In 2021 was a big rebound year, so China grew by 8.1%. The US economy grew by about 5.7% and is expecting in 2022 to grow at about 4%, largely recovering a lot of that lost economic output during the pandemic. China is going to continue to approach or surpass the US as the largest economy in the world. That will likely happen around 2030. The US is roughly, give or take, around 23% of global economic output, and that'll continue until about 2030 or so. We also saw the trade. The East Side region is one of the most trade-reliant regions of the country. And so we saw a huge disruption in trade. And that's happened across the globe. We saw a huge drop in trade of goods and services and exports and imports of commodities during the recession, but then a rapid recovery afterwards. And that's really had a really disruptive effect on our logistics system and supply chains, which we'll talk about. The U.S. economy is in a period of extended recovery from the last recession. So the recession, the non-farm employment had increased 113 consecutive months since September of 2010. That, of course, ended with the pandemic. That was a historic high going back to when data was collected going back to 1939. The most recent recession that we're coming out of, we've seen about 10 months or 12 months now of continuous non-farm employment growth, and there's little to suggest that might change in the next few cycles as well. Unemployment has fallen from a peak of about 15% down to about 4%. But really, unemployment is really, if you unpack employment, there's a lot of difference in different groups based on educational attainment level as well as race and ethnicity across the country. We saw, for instance, that people with bachelor's degrees or higher, which is very common within the OneEastside region, it's one of the most educated parts of the country, the unemployment rate among that cohort of workers in the labor market was only 2.3% as of the end of 2021. That compares with about 4.6% with people who don't have anything higher than a high school diploma. That difference in employment also applies to race and ethnicity. You can see, for instance, that African Americans had experienced much higher unemployment nationally. Going back to the Great Recession and prior to that, there was some convergence in unemployment nationally up until the pandemic. Unfortunately, that divergence has begun to expand again during the recovery period. See that people, whites and Asians, had experienced unemployment roughly around 3.4 to 3.6%, whereas African Americans are close to 7%. So inflation is obviously a really big concern, and it's something that has been really rattling markets and has raised a lot of really worries about the long-term impacts of inflation. For those that are old enough to remember the inflation of the 1980s or late 70s, early 80s, and the disruptive impact that had on the economy. There are really a couple different ways to measure inflation. There's what's called Consumer Price Index, which is one measure based on survey of consumers or households and what they're paying. And then there's what's called personal consumption expenditures, which is a survey of businesses and what prices they're charging. And then the Federal Reserve, their preferred measure is what's called core PCE, which is personal consumption expenditure, but netting out food and energy, which are typically much more volatile. But across all measures, we've seen historic high increases in inflation. The 7.1% CPI in the last month of 2021 was, or actually in January of 2022, was the highest since the early 1980s. And that actually applies across all three types of measures. And this really erodes people's consumption power, ability, their household consumption, and raises the augur that the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates, which would dampen growth and dampen the recovery potentially. Within the Seattle region, Consumer Price Index, after being at a low 0.9% year over year in late 2020, has surged upwards of 7.6% in 2021, at the end of 2021. So there are a lot of reasons why inflation is happening. The two main reasons have to do with a tight labor market as well as with supply chains. The tight labor market, we saw that there was a significant reduction in labor force participation, so a reduction in the labor force during the recession, and then that's only begun to trickle back. We saw, for instance, that a lot of workers left those low-wage jobs, and that resulted in seasonally adjusted wages growing at 5% year over year in the last quarter of 2021. And the median wage in January increased about the same, about 5.1%. That's the largest increase since 2002. The other factor, of course, is COVID impacts on supply chains. So we've seen, many of us have experienced empty, barren shelves at supermarkets and other kinds of stores, delayed deliveries of products on Amazon. And that was caused by factory closures from sick workers, both domestically as well as overseas, especially in places in Asia. And then shifting consumption patterns as more and more people opted to buy physical goods through e-commerce as opposed to spending on services. And that really created a lot of stress on the supply chain and logistics systems. And even small components, such as the semiconductor, if they're unavailable, such as in the vehicle market, in the vehicle industry, can have a really an outsized impact on prices. The other factors include excess liquidity, with the Federal Reserve outlays for about $3.6 trillion in actual stimulus based on $5 trillion in the last 2 years. But that really made up for lost wages. It wasn't additive for the most part on top of people already. There were some additive components, but it really wasn't. It was in lieu of lost wages for the most part. So the most recent estimates by San Francisco Fed estimate that in 2022, the Fed stimulus, especially the last round stimulus, the $1.9 trillion in 2021, will only contribute about 0.3 percentage points to inflation in 2022. Tariffs, of course, also create a cost to households. The punitive tariffs that were enacted in 2018 through 2019 by the Trump administration certainly affect household consumption and the cost borne by households, but there's a timing mismatch, so it doesn't really explain the most recent increase in inflation. You can see labor force participation, as I mentioned, fell in 2020, fell from 63% of working age adults down to 60%, and it's only gradually recovered. That has really helped to drive wages because of a constrained labor market. You have a high demand for workers, but you have or even consistent demand, but then reduction in availability or supply of workers. We've also seen the supply chain system has really been disrupted. The backlog at LA Long Beach, which is the largest port system in the country, had experienced an historic high in 2020 with more than 100 vessels. We saw probably also the pictures on the news of vessels waiting adrift or anchor. 77% of ports globally experience some degree of backlog in abnormally long times for turnaround of container traffic. And roughly about 98% of warehouses in the Southern California's logistics-heavy Inland Empire were basically at full occupancy. So all this was really happening on top of a very fragile system in place already, where we had limited supply and shortage even of truck drivers and just-in-time logistics. So there was a very sort of delicate balance that was already in place before the pandemic that really created a lot of stress and disruptions and delays in the supply chain. Another measure we also saw was that retailers as well, also during the pandemic, drew down their inventories and are now only building those inventories up. And that's what that dotted line represents. It's the ratio of retailer inventory to sales or advanced sales. And when that approaches one, that really indicates that there's going to be a shortage availability. And that's what indeed happened. A lot of people also shift consumption to e-commerce, which is more physical goods. So people during the pandemic opted to purchase instead of purchasing services, going out to eat, where buying more of their consumption was steering more towards buying of physical goods on e-commerce. And that had the effect also of increasing a lot of stress on the ports. And then lastly, people really increased their savings early on in the pandemic and are now drawing down that savings. We saw a really significant increase in personal savings rates during the recession, and now people are drawing that down and spending that savings, especially on physical goods, adding more stress. And this really affects the Pacific Northwest, especially the OneEastside region, because so many of our businesses here are import intensive. They really depend on the availability of imported components and goods in their manufacturing process. And that's particularly true with aerospace, with food and beverage processing, and other kinds of various kinds of advanced manufacturing that really can be a drag on growth. So now I'm going to go deep a little bit on the OneEastside, 23-city OneEastside region and talk a bit about what really makes this region unique. Of course, it's a hub first and foremost of global companies, whether it's Costco, it's got new operations for Amazon, Microsoft, T-Mobile, Boeing, Blue Origin. It's a really unique ecosystem of highly advanced companies and businesses that are multinational and globally renowned. The Eastside region is among the most educated, diverse, and high income earning in the United States. Roughly about 37% of households on the East Side earn at least $150,000 a year. That's essentially, that's more than double the rate for Washington State and for the US. 60% of residents on the East Side have at least a bachelor's degree. That compares with only 36% in Washington State and 32% in the US. And then the East Side is incredibly diverse. Roughly about 20% of all residents on the East Side were foreign born. And of those, 10% entered the US no earlier than 2010. 18% of all East Side residents actually immigrated from Asia, compared with just 6% for the US. East Side is also a big hub for educational institutions. You can see there are roughly about 30,000 students that were enrolled in East Side higher education programs in 2021-22, such as Bellevue College, UW Bothell, Renton Technical College, and so forth. And you can see East Side, roughly 27% of East Side residents identify as Asian. That compares against just 11% in Seattle and about 7% in the US. So one of the really great stories about the East Side is that despite all of the disruption and the pain that's been experienced across the country during the pandemic and all the job loss, the East Side actually had job growth during the most recent recession during the pandemic. And that's really because of the tech sector. The tech sector has been the main driver of that growth. In 2020, the Seattle metropolitan area, which includes King and Snohomish counties, had a net loss of 100,000 jobs. The East Side region, those 23 cities, actually experienced a gain of 4,000 net jobs. Now, that's really true because of the tech sector and the growth that's happened in the tech sector, but that doesn't mean that everybody experienced had a positive experience during the pandemic, of course. And we saw in the East Side that there were severe impacts felt, especially for a combination of food services, a loss of 1,600 jobs, And also the fact that all of the loss of remote workers or people working remotely as opposed to on-site really adversely impacted a lot of the businesses that serve that daytime traffic. So lots of restaurants, other kinds of services that serve the daytime commuter community and workers has been a big impact, as well as personal services, beauty salons, fitness centers, and so forth. There were roughly about 492,700 jobs on the east side in 2021. That was an increase over 484,200 jobs. The biggest component was services, which is really a wide category to include both, typically personal services, restaurants, a combination, but then also high-tech workers, software publishing, other kinds of tech activities. So as I mentioned, the tech sector has really been a big driver, and these are statewide numbers for 2019 and 2020. And again, what's really astonishing is that the tech sector, despite the fact Washington State, statewide 2019 to 2020, actually lost close to 200,000 jobs. 180,900 jobs were lost statewide, at least on a temporary basis in 2020. The tech sector actually added 20,300 jobs in that same period. So Washington State employment contracted by about 5.3%. The tech sector actually grew by 8%. And so many of those tech sector jobs were in the east side, and they're playing a big role. Those tech sector jobs really drive additional economic growth in the region because of the high wages those workers earn, the spending of that household, that income on various kinds of household consumption. We saw that, and that really kind of tells that story that Christine was referring to about the tale of two recoveries. The tech sector did really well, but all of the businesses, such as restaurants that cater to the tech sector and those tech workers, really suffered because they were not available. Those workers were not present. They were working remotely and not spending income, for instance, at their location where they would work typically. Tech is also continue to drive growth. We saw, for instance, most recently that there's been 14 new mega leases in the region that actually propelled the tech sector, our region, past the Bay Area for the most new tech office space in 2020. If you compare the east side to other major tech hubs across the country, in this case, Austin, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, Denver, and Atlanta, the tech sector, or the east side economy between 2009 and 2019 was kind of middle of the pack, grew about 2.2% per year. But between 2019 and 2021, it far exceeded everybody else in all these other regions in terms of job growth. The OneEastside region grew about 1.3% per year over the last 2 years. Every other major tech hub, with the exception of Austin, actually contracted in employment over that period, with Austin growing about 1.1%. You can also, the small businesses are also an integral part of the east side economy. They're roughly about 73% of all businesses, or work sites is what we call them, which are a rough approximation of businesses on the east side were of businesses of 10 or fewer employees. Nearly 1,700 business locations had to temporarily or permanently shutter in 2020, and the vast majority of those businesses were these small businesses of 10 employees or less. 11% of workers on the east side were working at these businesses. So these businesses really felt the brunt of the recession and really brunt of a lot of required closures, temporary closures, social distancing, and so forth. Unemployment rate, the east side is only at about 2.9%. That's well below Washington State and the US, which are at 3.9 or 4.5 and 3.9%. So again, really showing the resiliency, in large part, again, because a lot of these workers are highly educated workers in very resilient industries, such as the tech sector on the east side. Now, one of the other really telling stories about the east side has been population growth. We hear a lot about Seattle as a major hub for growth and population, bigger increases in population. But if you look at the numbers, in fact, since 2000, the east side cities combined have grown more than twice as fast as Washington State and compared to Seattle. There are about 749,700 residents on the east side in 2021. That would actually make the east side bigger than Seattle if the east side was its own city. Since 2010, the east side has added in net 186,000 new residents, or that's roughly about 18% of all new net residents across the entire state. course, this also creates a lot of pressure on the housing market. I'm sure many of us experienced the difficulties if you were looking for a home over the past several years. East Side is becoming increasingly unaffordable, especially for these services-based workers, those that were most directly adversely impacted by the pandemic, who work in the East Side but might not actually live in the East Side, but would like to be closer to their place of employment. Since 2012, the cost per square foot residential floor space has increased over 200% across many of the cities in the East Side, including Bellevue, Kirkland, Bothell, and Sammamish. And so every community, even rural areas, are experiencing rapid price increases. And some cities, in fact, are more expensive than Seattle, such as Bellevue and Kirkland. So I'll take the last part of this discussion, really talk about economic recovery and outlook, and what are the main considerations that we want to think about when we think about economic recovery, and what are the real limitations or inhibiting factors you might want to also consider in the next roughly about 5 to 10 years. So firstly, economic recovery, we project, Hypeak Strategy project that there will be an increase of about 40,000 jobs between 2021 and 2025 in the East Side region. That's largely driven by organic growth, and what we're seeing in terms of that's driven by population growth, it's driven by many new businesses opening, but it's also driven by a lot of new new office investments and investments by companies such as Amazon, by Meta, which is what used to be called Facebook, by other companies, as well as the expansion of the Microsoft and opening of the Microsoft campus, reopening the campus. That's going to help drive growth. A big wild card in that, of course, is what's going to happen with respect to remote work. So if a lot of workers, for instance, a lot of businesses decide that they're going to move to a hybrid model of employment, where their workers might only go to the office 3 or 4, maybe 2 to 3 days a week, and then work remotely somewhere else, that could also be that could weigh down growth, because so many businesses, as I mentioned before, especially minority-owned and ethnic-owned businesses, are really relying on or really catered to a lot of those workers and serving them, providing accommodation services, restaurant services, other kinds of retail services. The loss of that daily foot traffic could really be a challenge for those businesses, at least partially, especially if those employers decide not to have their workers there every day or allow them to work remotely at least part of the week. But for now, at least, we project about a 40,000 job increase. Population should increase from about 749,700 residents and to roughly about 770,000 residents by 2025. So, as I mentioned, tech sector has led the way, and this really gets again to that narrative around a tale of two recoveries. The tech sector has really been driving growth, but small businesses have really struggled. I had the opportunity to work on a project recently for the city of Redmond that looked at the impact of the pandemic on small businesses, including minority ethnic-owned businesses, and really understand a lot of the challenges those businesses are facing, and a lot of the lack of connectivity between federal programs or alignment of federal programs and local economic development programs and the needs of those businesses. And so there is a lot to be disentangled with those programs, and helping to find ways to support businesses, to provide the proper mentorship that's available, and also to build connectivity from a cultural and linguistic standpoint as well. Remote work will hurt a lot of businesses. Most companies are planning resumption of on-site work as soon as Omicron fades. I believe Microsoft will be going back to in-office work very soon as well. It's part of that. But again, that hybrid model could be very disruptive to the economic recovery of many of these businesses, these small businesses. So again, looking at the PPP loans, or the Payroll Protection Program loans, you get a sense for who was really impacted by the pandemic again, and who was less impacted or a little more resilient. Micro businesses, those are businesses of 5 employees or less, received about 2/3 of all the loans on the East Side between 2020 and 2021, about 14% by value. So these are the businesses that were most adversely impacted, that really needed help, that really were suffering because of the lack of foot traffic and customers throughout the pandemic. Whereas those with 100 employees or more received about 1/4 of the loans in grants, but represented about 1.4% of all the actual loans that were going out, but roughly 26% by value of those loans. You can see too that full service restaurants, as expected, were the most directly impacted. And this is just, looking at PPP loans and grants as a proxy for the impacts of the pandemic. They received about over 1,079 loans and grants over the past 2 years from the federal government, or about $205 million. And these are businesses that averaged about 22 employees per operation. And you can go down a list of other, whether it's beauty salons, other kinds of professional technology services, many small businesses, all of them small businesses that averaged about 10 workers per business were the main recipients of these loans by number of loans. A lot of the recovery, looking forward, the tech sector, again, is really going to be the driver of new office space. And that's really what's been factoring into our forecast for jobs in the region, is a lot of it, driven by both the organic growth of the tech sector, but also the announcements and new growth, new operations, new activities, new office space usage by the tech sector on the east side. Within the Bellevue Central Business District, there's projected to be about 1.5 million square feet of office space for absorption in 2022. Amazon has announced a 6 million square feet in Bellevue and plans to add 25,000 jobs over the next few years in Bellevue. Microsoft is set to complete their multi-square foot expansion at its resident campus in Redmond by 2023. And that'll be in time for light rail. And that'll going to add, in addition to the existing Microsoft footprint, will add many more jobs in addition with the expansion. And then Meta, as I mentioned, also known as Facebook, has committed to occupying more than 1.4 million square feet of space by 2024. So the things that are most pressing that we're thinking about, and we're thinking about resilience, and we're thinking about recovery. So as I mentioned before, the return of on-site office work is a big concern. It could go either way, and what impact that'll have on the local economic recovery. Consumption patterns may not return to pre-pandemic levels. It's possible, and we've seen that while e-commerce sales were already moving an upward trajectory before the pandemic, there was a very sudden increase in e-commerce sales. And that's likely to stay as people become increasingly comfortable with ordering a larger share of their basket of goods through e-commerce platforms and not going to stores as much. That could affect a lot of the retail sector on the east side. That also really affects the arts and culture sector, because there's a lot of new technologies that consumers want and how they consume arts and culture, whether it's music, whether it's other forms of entertainment. That is really going to challenge the arts and culture sector, which is really an integral part of our community. And that could also have an adverse impact. And these are businesses and nonprofits that were also severely impacted by the pandemic, because so much of their delivery of their service is delivered in person, and that's going to be a challenge. So these organizations will be challenged to think about ways to leverage new technology to deliver at least part of what they do to their consumer base or their constituent base. Inflation is projected to get under control through the first half of the year. There's a lot of obviously uncertainties. The unfortunate crisis in Ukraine right now is most likely going to be affecting oil prices and energy prices. The U.S. is much less dependent on foreign oil and foreign energy sources as it was during the OPEC embargo era in the 70s. Nonetheless, these are global commodities. We are still affected by them nonetheless, even if we're not purchasing directly from Russia, for instance. So that's going to have an impact likely that we could see, and that could really continue to disrupt inflation and prop up inflation as well. And there's other global developments, changes in supply chains, fissures in trade in the U.S.-China relationship could also affect a lot of businesses in the OneEastside region, especially given how important China is as a trade partner to Washington State, as well as especially a critical market for tech companies that are based on the east side. And then affordability. The affordability challenges are quite real. As I mentioned, there is a large misalignment between a lot of workers in the services sector that work in the east side, but find it much more difficult to be able to buy homes on the east side. And that's only seemingly going to get worse and worse, given the continued growth of many of our leading sectors and growth of the regional overall population. it's going to make it much more prohibitively expensive in many cases for many of our residents to be able to afford to live on the East Side. And that will be another big challenge. And then lastly, of course, we don't know if there'll be another variant or there'll be much more what that variant would be and what impact that variant of COVID will have on mask wearing or on our other kind of public policies, and what impact that will have on local and on the economy, and disruptions to retail and disruptions to consumption in the future. So with that, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to share my thoughts today. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at my email at spencer@highpeakstrategy.com. And thanks again for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Well, thank you, Spencer. And wow, our region is growing at such a dramatic pace, but it is clear that our region and our recovery has not been equitable. And the tale of our two pandemic recoveries is very stark. There still is a tremendous need in our nonprofits and our community business organizations. And to help be that bridge between these two parts of our economy, I am pleased to announce that we will be partnering with 501 Commons on an exciting new opportunity for our Eastside nonprofits, Give Big Eastside. Last year, over 1,600 participating nonprofits across Washington state were able to raise over $17.4 million, including $5.5 million in matching funds through the Give Big program. And we are extremely excited to be able to amplify the resources, the training opportunities, and outreach for our nonprofits across East King County. So I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Nancy Long, Executive Director of 501 Commons, to talk about this new opportunity to support the businesses and nonprofits in our community.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone. Happy to be with you here today. 501 Commons is very excited to partner with OneEastside to create a focus on Give Big Eastside this year. And a little bit about us to give you some background, and then we'll talk about what lies ahead of us with Give Big this May 3rd and 4th this year. 501 Commons is a nonprofit organization that provides nonprofits with management and technology expertise. That includes back office support in IT, HR, and finance, free advisory services, coaching, learning, leadership development opportunities, and a lot of other capacity building programs for nonprofits of all sizes and all types. We've been in Washington State for more than 30 years, and we serve about 2,000 nonprofits each year, most of them in the Pacific Northwest, but also across the country. I think you probably all know that nonprofits are really critical to the success of any community. And the information that we just heard, I think, is a kind of a sobering reminder that many nonprofits, especially those in the arts and culture sector, were on the really short end of the stick in terms of recovery from the pandemic, are still dealing with recovery in some ways. But even those organizations that had economic gains often had huge increases in demand that went along with the economic gains. And many organizations had to pivot to provide very different services in order to serve what the community needs were during the last couple of years. Nonprofits really improve our community life. They make families healthier. They help young people find their place in the world. And they tackle our toughest problems. That's what we do with things that are really hard to do. We give that to the nonprofit sector to handle. Our services really strengthen nonprofits and provide affordable access so that they can afford to have expertise that they couldn't generally have on their staff. And our intent is to amplify their impact so that all communities and people flourish. And that includes the communities on the East Side. So turning to Give Big and what the opportunity is there, and we're so excited to be able to work with OneEastside to try to build this opportunity into real gains for communities on the East Side. We took over management of Give Big from the Seattle Foundation in 2019. Last year, the campaign raised $17.4 million, and that's online donations, matching funds, donations from donor advised funds and IRA accounts, employee match, and also in-kind media donations from our many, many media partners. As Christina mentioned, we have a lot of participation from Eastside community organizations, but we do want to increase that. And most important, we want the nearly 300 organizations that are participating to be able to raise more money. And with your help, we can do that. We can do what we did in 2022. We can do more than that. And I'm really hopeful that we'll see gains in the amount that those nonprofits are able to raise. One of the reasons why Give Big is so important to nonprofits is that 20% of the donations are from first-time donors. And because of the pandemic, you can imagine it's been very difficult for nonprofits to attract new donors. People aren't going for those, introduction coffees. They're not having tours of their offices. They're not, as able to make connections with new people in their community as they have in the past. So Give Big has become even more important because of the pandemic as a way for nonprofits, particularly smaller nonprofits, to raise money. These first-time donors often visit the website to give to an organization they know and love, and then they start clicking around like we all do when we get on Amazon or other online shopping opportunities, and they find another nonprofit to fall in love with and another mission to care about, or two or three. And on average, most donors give to 3 organizations. So you can see how this is like yeast and bread. Suddenly we're bringing new people in as donors to new nonprofits. People are learning that you don't have to have huge assets to be a philanthropist. Everybody can be a person that can give and support their community. And what Give Big is not about big donations. It's about when we all give together, we give big. And so every donor with donations of any amount counts in the Give Big universe. I know, Christina, that success of the Give Big campaign depends on increasing the number of people who hear about Give Big and are moved by people they trust to get involved. And that's why OneEastside's support and the support of Eastside businesses can really be that megaphone for the campaign. We can get the word out to a lot more people. People give because somebody they know is encouraging them to give, is guiding them, and making them feel like they have a role to play. And so all of us can help people have that feeling. For those of you who are have businesses in Eastside, you can get your employees and customers involved in supporting nonprofits serving the Eastside. And there's some really easy ways to do that don't take a lot of time and don't have a lot of cost, don't have any cost in most cases associated with them. The easiest one is sign up to be a Give Big business champion. And you can do that just by emailing Greg at 501commons.org. The information is also available on the Give Big website, which is wagives.org. And in just a few minutes, you can create a page on that website that you can use to promote giving to your employees and customers, and kind of create your own mini Give Big campaign that you can promote and show that you're showing up for nonprofits on the East Side. If you want to match donations, we can make that really easy peasy for you to do an employee matching program. Or if you have a matching program, employees can record their match on the platform and activate it in that way. Your company can also gain recognition by being a Give Big sponsor or by sponsoring prizes during giving days. And those prizes, the cost for promoting prizes starts at only $250. So there's a very low level to get involved if you want to put some of your advertising or community giving assets into this campaign. Also, I want to encourage you individually to think about setting up a personal fundraising page for a cause that you care about, that's important to you, and use that to reach out to friends, family, and colleagues. And it's a great way for you to say, this is an organization I care about that I know is doing important work in our community, and I'm a donor, and I'm asking you to join me as a donor. So that just takes a few minutes to do and can be a really fun and powerful way to leverage your relationships with friends, family, and colleagues, and even with customers and employees. So if any of you are intrigued by that and want to learn more, just get involved with Give Big by emailing greg@51commons.org. And with a very low investment of your time, we can get you set up to be a successful contributor. And we look forward to working with OneEastside to find other ways in which we can get you involved and promote this opportunity to invest in Eastside communities. So thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Nancy. And we are very excited to be a part of this great opportunity to support our community.
Thank you.
So now we move on to the second part of our program, and we are all seeing our cities changing and growing before our very eyes. And we really are at the precipice of an opportunity to build our community for the future. And here to reflect on what we have just heard from Spencer and all that great data we just listened to, I would like to introduce our panel for today. We have Jane Broom from Microsoft, Ed Fries from OneUp Ventures, Debbie Lacey from Eastside for All, Louis Rudd from Azel's Famous Chicken, Matt Wilson from Meta's Reality Lab Research, and to moderate the discussion, the publisher of the Puget Sound Business Journal, Don Baker. Don, I turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Christina. It's great to be here today, and I look forward to the conversation this morning with each of you as well. So let's go ahead and kick things off. So we have a question for each of you to address, and that is really, what has surprised you the most about the past year? Jane, would you like to take that first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Good morning, everybody. And boy, that was a data-packed presentation we just saw, and incredible information. I'm excited to hopefully get that in a PowerPoint so I can kind of dive into it and learn a little bit more. You know, I think in the last year, I guess what I will talk more about is the incredible collaboration that took place amongst the business community, the nonprofit community, the public sector, to basically rally and do whatever was possible to get us through the last couple of years. And so that was everything from, you know, responding to calls for PPE, to setting up vaccine clinics, to getting signs on buses, to free rides to your vaccine appointment, like everything. That it was sort of one of those moments of all hands on deck, and the way the people of this community responded was pretty incredible. And, you know, as a global company, we sort of see what's happening around the world. And, you know, honestly, I could not be more proud of the giving, the collaboration, the all hands on deck, just the fortitude of this region over the last 2 years. So that, I guess that's mine.
Great. Debbie, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks. I guess for me, the real surprise, of course, came 2 years ago at this time. Who would have thought that we would be doing all this on Zoom and doing everything that was just mentioned that we all managed to do? So I don't think that the last year surprised me all that much, but I will say of note, just to echo what was just said, an incredible amount of affirming that what we're capable of in times of need and crisis as a community. And I certainly saw that amongst my peers and colleagues in the nonprofit community-based organization world. Just a tremendous heart, people doing more with not enough, and really stepping up in ways that they hadn't been before, and the stretch required for that, you know, on all of our parts. I think that was of note in the past year for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Louis, looking back on the past year, what has surprised you the most?
I didn't anticipate, first of all, that the pandemic would be extended as long as it was. And then to be on this side of it, and it appears that we are on the other side of it now and moving forward. And, you know, to see how everyone came together, there was definitely some challenges and some chaos and some confusion, but to have come together in a way that allowed us to get through it, where some were impacted more negatively than others, but we got through it. And I do think that we're on the other side of it. And I'm surprised that, you know, we are still doing as well as we are, given the circumstances that we were faced with overall.
Yeah, I know we all definitely hope we're on the other side of it. So I definitely agree with you on that. Matt, share with us. Yeah.
We're going to claim that.
Matt, your thoughts on the past year?
Yeah, I think I agree with everyone here on kind of both the surprise on how long it's taken. I think we all thought we might be back in the office last year, and we're even preparing for that. I think other surprises are really around the push for continued innovation. You know I was surprised when I was working at Facebook and all of a sudden I was working at Meta. So, you know, and the big focus towards innovation, towards the metaverse. And so I think that, you know, things are changing, and the pandemic and other things really kind of affected how we look at work now and how we move forward with innovation. And, you know, that affects everybody in the community where we live. And so I think, you know, that was probably a big shock to me, but I think, you know, I'm looking forward to that recovery that's coming. That's just around the corner. I'm looking forward to getting back into the office and seeing others in the community where I live.
Great. Ed, your biggest surprise?
Yeah, I guess this whole situation pushed people in the game business to be even more creative about how we work. I think there was a feeling that everybody needed to be together in a room to be creative. And once we were pushed to you know, deal with the situation, it turns out that isn't necessarily the case. And there's new tools being created. Of course, Zoom is one that we're on, but more sophisticated tools for creating virtual offices and having people work together, and that are coming, and some of which are coming out of the game business, just like Slack, for example, was created by a game company. So I think we're going to continue to see innovation in sort of virtual work that's going to come out of this. And mostly, I guess I'm just really impressed with the adaptability of people, both you know, in our business, but just in general. I mean, we've all moved to sort of virtual living. I mean, people, you know, ordering things online and trying to support our local businesses best we can.
So moving out of that, but sticking with sort of the virtual world and coming out of the virtual world, Jane, I'd like to come to you and just, so Microsoft has announced the reopening of its campus. It's a big deal for a lot of people and even other businesses in the area. What can you share with us in terms of how the company is thinking about this next phase?
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, we are very excited to have announced the reopening of campus. It essentially what happens is the campus is fully open on Monday, the 28th. And basically it's about a month-long period of transition to sort of get people, you know, reaffiliated with the campus, the technology, their offices, you know, understanding how their new life is going to be between home and work. But we are pretty excited about it, honestly. We have you just heard about it, an incredible new campus that's going to be open next year. That I think during the process of the last 2 years in the design, you know, this whole notion of hybrid work environments, you know, we had this great opportunity to really learn what that could be. And I think in time for us to think about how the office space might change and the need for conference rooms to be fully technology efficient and supportive of hybrid meeting times and things like that. You know, we got here to this moment because of the incredible collaboration across the board from, you know, the private sector, the public sector, the residents of our region really working together to make sure that we are safe. I think that's always been our number one priority. I think we are getting there for sure. You know, and it's going to be interesting. I think there's a lot of excitement, but there's also a lot of anxiety about what it means to come back to the office. And we're going to work through that. The company's been amazing about providing, you know, information and supports and materials and things like that. And really understanding that this is going to be a change for people. And all of us as business leaders and community leaders need to be responsive to that. The rule for us is essentially people are being asked to be in the office about 50% of the time or more. And that is completely, you know, you don't need to talk to your manager about that. You have the flexibility to sort of live within that, within that time frame. For some people who do want to work at home more than 50%, we're being, you know, those folks are being asked to work at something out with their manager. That will then, you know, we'll adjust office space and meeting space and those sorts of things around those new numbers. So that's all work ahead for us. But, you know, I think for the surrounding community to the Microsoft campus, so many of you, the small businesses, the nonprofits, the education groups, I think we know how much of an impact our campus has on all of your businesses. And we are delighted to be back. And we'll do all we can to help support, you know, people going back and getting ice cream and getting fried chicken and, you know, getting gasoline and doing all those things that we need to do as a functioning region. So thank you.
Yeah, it definitely has an impact on the community. You know, it's interesting too, the idea of people getting reacclimated to being in an office environment and, you know, the sort of reimagining, rethinking how we use office space and its purpose. That's an interesting aspect. Matt, I'd like to turn to you for a minute. You know, you work on the cutting edge of innovation at Meta Reality Labs Research. So tell us a bit more about what you do, but also what was it like to work remote while trying to be innovative?
Yeah, thanks, Don. You know, I think the first part is I work in AR and VR hardware and software research. And so one of the challenges is research is really kind of a creative endeavor. Like there's a lot of innovation and collaboration that has to happen to develop these breakthroughs. And, you know, it's really no different than games to some extent on how we approach it. And I think in some cases, it was really difficult because we work with both hardware and software. And in some cases in the software space, working remote or that kind of thing is not as challenging. But on the hardware side, it's very challenging. We can't actually move our labs to homes or that kind of things. And so that did require us to change kind of how we work. And I think that as we're moving back to hybrid, there's new sets of challenges. You know, right now we're all working through VC and it's equal. The communication bandwidth is effectively equal for everyone. But as we start going back to the office, you know, having that little conversation at the water cooler at lunch or just walking over someone's desk or even collaboration becomes way more, you know, higher bandwidth effectively. So you can get a lot more communication done at the office. And so that proposes new challenges around including those people, the workforce that has chosen to work from home or may just not be in the office that day. And so as Ed mentioned, there's a lot of new tools we're looking at to help with that collaborative experience and bringing people into the office. But I would say this is a new challenge. Like we are not, that all the tools aren't there yet. And I think that this will require us all to kind of work closely with both our communities and our employees to make sure we're delivering the right pieces for those folks.
Okay, great. And Ed, I want to turn to you for a minute. You know, you manage a venture fund. What has that been like during the pandemic? And what's the appetite for investment in startups and companies in general? And what are some of the opportunities for the East Side there?
Yeah, a few different things. I mean, we started this fund just about a year before the pandemic happened, and we were just kind of getting going when everything changed. But in a way that was helpful for me. I was traveling a lot, and to be able to speak with people all over the world. There, kind of coming into the pandemic, there was this feeling, oh, you had to meet people in person before you invested. And when that was no longer possible, it actually made a lot of us in the venture world more efficient. We were able to get more deals done. And that's actually been going quite well. So that's been good. One thing is our fund is pretty different. We're really focused on building community among founders. And so connecting founders together and creating a space where they can communicate with each other and share and help. And so, at least in the past, community's been about getting people together. You want them to spend time together and build trust with each other, and that's where sharing and helping comes from. And so we've had to do that virtually, and it's I think human beings are social beings, and so there's we can only do so much virtually. I just got back last night from kind of the first big game conference that was done in person in the last 2 years. And it was just great to see people again. For our fund, we had about half a dozen of our portfolio companies there, and we got together and had a dinner, and it was just great to be together again. So, so I think we've made a lot of progress on what we can do virtually, but also there's no replacement for being together as people.
So, kind of following up on that, what are your views on kind of the remote work and the sort of return to office, particularly for the gaming industry?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like there's a little company here called Spry Fox. They're up on the top of Finn Hill here in the Juanita area, and they've been doing remote work for a decade. And I really saw them step up and kind of teach the other guys how to do it. How do you run an organization like this? How do you work for just daily and weekly? How do you what are your processes that make it work? So they've been great in helping other people learn how to do it. And I think that the thing that's happened now is in some ways we can't go back, because once you're remote, then you start, and you're growing, you start to hire people from all over. And once you do that, you're not going to move them all here. So we're going to, I think pretty much everyone's going to continue in some form of hybrid from now on. And that's allowed us to, pick and choose among the best talent in the world, which is great. But it does make things more complicated.
Definitely. And Louis, I want to turn to you for a minute because obviously the restaurant industry has been particularly hard hit during the pandemic, and not one where people can work remote. And so, first, just how are your restaurants doing, and how is the industry overall doing in terms of recovering from the damage that was suffered during the pandemic?
Well, fortunately, we're doing really well. And from day one, we were fortunate to have a concept that was sort of geared for the situations that were created by the pandemic when people were kind of mandated to stay home and allowed to-go orders. And we fortunately have partnered with a third-party delivery company. And so we were already equipped with the kind of packaging for to-go services and all that. And initially, it was a shock, and we thought we were in for a rough ride and didn't know how it was going to turn out. But we actually did very well that first year. And then we were wondering, okay, how will it be for the second year? When we thought we would be out of it. And fortunately, again, we were able to do well. And we've also been able to do well with staffing. We haven't had to close any of the stores and alter our hours. I mean, there's been a couple of times when we've been short-staffed and closed earlier, maybe open later, but for the most part, we've been able to maintain. But overall, we're amongst the blessed and so many others that I feel for that didn't have that opportunity and didn't have the kind of resources. didn't make it through. But from what I understand, and from those that I've talked to in the industry, the leaders in the industry, we're going to be looking at 2023 before we can begin to see some sort of a normalcy where we can actually predict and count on supplies being available and a stable pricing market. But we just had an example where one of our suppliers, where we were getting our chicken, chose to downsize, well, eliminate a lot of the services that they were providing. And we have to move to another source. And that was a scare. At the end of the year, we get 3-week notice that, hey, we're not going to be able to supply your chicken. I'm like, we're out of business without chicken. But things are starting to look up and look better. And there's a lot of resources out there that are geared towards helping those in the industry to survive and continually grow.
Well, that's definitely good to hear. Debbie, turning to you, as we've heard, it has been a tale of two recoveries when we look at the level of recovery going on as we emerge from the sort of main part of the pandemic. Can you share with us more about that, and what is the reality for many people not being lifted up by the recovery and sort of the tech boom that's going on now?
Yeah, thank you. Well, of course, we know that times of crisis don't create the disparities, right? They highlight and unfortunately exacerbate them. So from a racial equity and social justice perspective, this tale of two recoveries, not just from the perspective of our tech sector versus non-tech sectors, of course, but more about the very different experiences of our small businesses rooted in the racial and ethnic disparities that Spencer touched on earlier too. So if we look back, prior to the pandemic, nearly 60% of Black-owned businesses were at risk of financial distress. And that was compared to about 27% of white-owned businesses. So, yeah, and we also know that most of our new businesses don't receive funding actually from outside investors. They use equity in their homes to start their businesses. So from 2019, we know that white business owners had almost 5 times the amount of home equity as their Black and Latino counterparts. So we see a lot of these disparities playing out. Black and brown, Indigenous, and other people of color are less likely to have emergency savings. As a result, they're more often forced to rely on non-business income, such as other family members' income earnings, debt, et cetera. And making those higher interest payments drains their cash at a time when they need it the most. So these disparities are also true for some of our immigrant-owned businesses who may experience language and cultural barriers as well, on top of some of those other systemic challenges. So one of the things that I found recently that was a really interesting perspective and a good one to think about moving forward was put out by McKinsey and Company, and they've shared this report about building a supportive ecosystem for Black-owned businesses. And one of the things that we look at is right now there's a lot of investment in information sharing, training, mentorship, helping individual business owners get loans. All of that is very well and good and much needed. But unfortunately, it tends to perpetuate, if we're just focused on those things, perpetuates the false and harmful notion that challenges can be overcome by addressing the shortcomings of the business owners and their businesses. That is not what we need to be focusing on in the bigger picture. We need institutional and structural changes across all parts of our community so we can all have the benefits and reap the benefits of the opportunities and growth.
So with that kind of, Louis, I want to go back to you for a minute and kind of from your perspective, how did the pandemic compound the problem of social and racial inequalities in our communities? And what do you think needs to be done to help that?
Well, first of all, I think there was a very negative impact for a lot of African-American owned businesses, Black owned businesses, and a couple in particular that I was aware of that due to no fault of their own, had to shut their businesses down. And again, operating with low to no income, having to close their doors, were faced with going out of business, which led me to partnering with DoorDash and coming up with an initiative called the Rudd's Rub Initiative, raising up Black businesses and utilizing funds that DoorDash wanted to partner with us to promote Ezell's. And at this time, or during this time, there was a lot of focus and conversations around systemic racism and social inequities. And there are a lot of people out there now that want to really understand what that is and how it has impacted the Black business community and Black businesses in general and people of color. And so DoorDash was one of those that wanted to listen and understand, and then allowed me to divert those funds into the initiative that got it started. And then I shared that with a couple other supplier partners and distributors that we work with, and we were able to raise over $120,000 that we could share with and through grants and awards with some of those small businesses that without that would have closed their doors. For example, the one coffee shop that couldn't pay for the lease payments for the equipment. Without the equipment, he's out of business. Without his business, he has no income, period. But yeah, so the disparities are there. And I'm really pleased with all of the conversations, but I'll be more pleased with action that creates the kind of positive impact. We talk about the investors. We know for a fact that there's less than 5% of the funds through private equity funds and others that goes into the Black community and people of color to invest in their businesses. We faced it firsthand, the redlining, the lack of access to capital. 25 years into our business, we were still having a challenge getting a loan. We currently have 4 restaurants on the east side, but there were landlords at one point that wouldn't accept an application for a lease for their property. And so I see a change taking place right now, but there needs to be a greater change. And I'm happy to see, again, the level of awareness amongst people that really want to have these conversations so they understand how they can be a part of the solution.
And when it comes to investment, you said that you're seeing a bit of a change in that. Are there more examples you can share of that?
Examples of investors or?
More openness to investment in Black-owned businesses or other businesses.
Well, again, there are a lot of conversations that are taking place now amongst angel investors, private equity firms, big corporations that want to support. I mean, I see different organizations like Amazon, Microsoft, some of the big corporations that are now forming internal programs to support Black-owned businesses, people of color, small businesses. And they're coming up with grants. And it is important, again, that it's not just conversation, and it's not just about creating opportunities for mentoring and consulting. No, there needs to be funding. And those communities, again, if we collectively continue the dialogue, because there are, again, so many people that didn't really understand, and so many still don't understand what the impact of redlining has had on the Black community. When we opened up in the Central District, there were 87% Black people lived in that community owning homes and owning businesses. Now there's less than 15% that was dispersed due to gentrification and redlining because they couldn't access capital. They couldn't utilize even the equity in their homes to advance their businesses or get better education for their kids, a better healthcare. All these things are associated with those disparities that came about through social inequities and systemic racism and lack of access to capital. And again, I hear it more. I'm on the advisory board now for the Restaurant Leadership Conference. When I started going there 7, 8 years ago, I was one of maybe 3 or 4 other African Americans or people of color that I would see at the event. And so even their model now is changed to have a greater focus on people of color, Black-owned businesses, smaller businesses, so that they can be more of assistance in helping them to sustain and grow.
I'm curious, does anybody else have any thoughts on just how we can improve access to capital for all?
Yeah, I mean, diversity was one of the things that my partner and I really wanted to focus on when we started this fund. And I think we've done pretty well there. I'll talk a little more about it in a minute, but you know, the game business in general, you know, these days almost everyone's a gamer, and yet if you look at the core of the business, it was started by young white guys like me, you know, and so we were not necessarily reflective of the audience today, which is more than 50% female and very diverse, right? And so we're trying to improve the diversity in the gaming business, and you know what makes it work, say in my business in the venture world, is for somebody like me to try it and then to have success. And that's what we're seeing with our fund. We've made 42 investments now around the world, and our fund performance is frankly off the charts. It's done incredibly well. Just to pick an example, one of our portfolio companies, Black founder David Ortiz, who Matt and I both worked with back in the day at Microsoft, his company SimWin Sports is announcing today an investment at $100 million valuation, which is we got in a lot earlier than that. So it's good for our investors. It's great for Dave. It's great for Black game developers everywhere. So you know, diversity is something Microsoft's taking very seriously. I know their game business has been pushing hard in that area, and it's something where, you know, we need to do more, but we've been able to show that by focusing on it, it's not just something to feel good about. It's something that's great business that can be great for everyone. So
great. The only thing I would add, I really appreciate the conversation that just happened, and I think there's two things that have come into my mind in all of this, and making sure that as we as a community are doing, development and planning and agenda setting and so forth, it's ensuring that people with lived experiences of all different kinds are at the table during every phase of that decision making. I think that helps grow the awareness. That much as what Lewis was talking about is that I think there's just people are waking up and learning and understanding more, but we've got to get to a point where there's greater understanding and that it actually moves to action. Because I agree. I think, even here at Microsoft, I think, that has been a transition that we've been making over the last couple of years, is that really focusing in on action. And what is it that we can offer, and what is it that we can really bring to the table to share power, to share decision making, those sorts of things. And I think that's what we need to really make the difference.
Yeah, great. I want to look at sort of some of the things that have been done during the pandemic to make a difference. Debbie, recognizing that community-based organizations have risen to the challenges that have been created by the pandemic by helping individuals and organizations navigate the opportunities that are available. Can you share some examples of this work?
Yes, happy to. And wondering if my slides can be pulled up here just to highlight some of the work happening in the group that I'm part of, and here hopefully representing well. We do know that our community-based organizations have had a huge role in connecting with small business owners, from Black, Brown, and immigrant communities that did not have access to information and all the things that we've already been talking about here. So we have a group in East King County of amazing leaders. And you might have heard from Angie Hinojos earlier from Centro Cultural, one of our members of this group. And I wanted to highlight quickly just a couple of examples. If we go to the next slide, we have one of our partners is the Muslim Community Network Association, and they've created the first Muslim business directory for Washington State. That's huge. They are also looking at a BIPOC business directory for our region as well. And just to get a little bit more personal and give you a sense of how this touches lives, if you go to the next slide, Indian American Community Services reaches out to many of their South Asian business owners, and including many of our hair and beauty salons here in the East Side that are run primarily by women. And they help them apply for loans, access residential rental assistance, even got them and their workers grocery gift cards, because there's so much shame in their community about going to food banks. So that's not an option for many of them. Connected them to vaccine clinics. One of the owners of a salon in Crossroads has a debilitating condition where she needs extensive physical therapy for her arm due to occupational overuse. And she's her family's primary income earner. So this organization is helping her update her marketing brochures, supplies, get her supplies and equipment, set up a social media marketing campaign, the real hands-on technical support and moral and emotional support from a community. And they're able to direct community members who want to be trained in that field, help them help her business while they're also getting some valuable training. So those are just a couple of brief examples of what's happening in our community-based organizations and how they're really holding such a network together in their communities.
Great, yeah. It's so important to have that community involvement and engagement. Matt, turning to you for a minute, you live in Duval, you're actively engaged in your community. As we've talked about some, the East Side population is growing dramatically. A lot of those individuals have that work from home model where they can live anywhere. From your perspective, what can be done across the East Side to engage residents to become more active in their communities?
Yeah, it's a great question, Don. In Duval, I support the Northwest Arts Center nonprofit. It's a nonprofit that focuses on art programs for everyone in the community and provides a large range of art classes, workshops, and events to support kind of creative culture in the community. And I think one of the challenges is, as we're moving towards recovery, and I think Debbie mentioned this, is the ecosystem is still broken. And part of the ecosystem being broken is, even as maybe these nonprofits are getting some funding, like the Northwest Arts Center, they don't have the teachers they need. They don't have the volunteers they need. And so it's a full ecosystem. And part of that ecosystem means people in the community are going out, seeing these nonprofits and getting back to volunteering, getting back to participating and supporting these vital programs inside the community. And so I think that one of the things the cities can do and the community can do is be more involved in the full ecosystem. And so it always starts with funding. Like, getting funding to these nonprofits is vitally critical. But beyond funding, it involves things like exposure around, having events in the community, bringing these nonprofits out, getting that exposure, having markets, giving reasons for the community to get back engaged so the ecosystem can grow. Because without the teachers and without the volunteers, these nonprofits really aren't going to survive. And I think the nonprofits still feel like they're alone. And I think the small businesses still feel like they're alone. And so, the support is much easier for the bigger businesses. The support is much easier for anybody that's not a nonprofit, effectively. And so really developing these programs is going to be critical, I think, for our recovery.
Anyone else have thoughts just around, how to boost the nonprofit sector in the organizations?
I have a couple thoughts. One, It's interesting to me because I think in a lot of ways what people are saying is that like learning to be great as a hybrid person, as a hybrid worker, as a hybrid organization is almost becoming a competitive edge or a differentiator for folks. And I think that even applies to nonprofits as well. And that we've, for nonprofits to be able to capitalize on perhaps a workforce that's has a little bit more flexibility in their day, could increase things like volunteerism at different parts of the day, or board leadership, or even micro volunteering activities that can be done in a virtual environment. I think there's going to be some really interesting creative opportunities that come from this, from nonprofit organizations. And I think those that really dive into that and really explore fast, I think will benefit a lot. I also think, one of the things that we've been acutely aware of for years at Microsoft is just the technology infrastructure within nonprofits is also something that lacks. And, it's something that we've been really focusing on, and I think other companies have been focusing on it more as well, is that nonprofits are a critical, if not the critical in some ways, element of community. They're the connective tissue. And making sure that, we are supporting nonprofit organizations as the professional organizations that they are. And that means technology, that means capacity building, that means being able to pay more than livable wages to nonprofit staff. And I think it's an opportunity for all of us in the philanthropic community to really think about that and think about how are we providing funding to these organizations? How can we be less restrictive on how nonprofits utilize funding so that they can actually build up their capacity to become more of a professional organization and those sorts of things. So it's going to be interesting. To me, it goes back to the first question you asked, is in terms of surprises during the pandemic. And I guess this isn't a surprise. Nonprofits are the ones that held our communities together, whether they were the arts groups, the after school programs, the healthcare, the senior supports, the Meals on Wheels, everything. They are the ones that held us together in so many ways. And I think it's something that we need to remember and we need to honor as we move forward.
Definitely. And Debbie, kind of from your perspective, how can we all, kind of our cities, our businesses, our nonprofits, do more to create a spirit of inclusive community that's welcoming to everyone?
I think we've definitely been hearing some of that already, which is great. I think that in part it's the honoring of the thought leadership and the expertise and wisdom that exists in all sectors of our community. And we were just talking about nonprofits. And so often one of the things that happens is, well, we're starting to see more funds coming to nonprofits that are directly connected to our Black and Brown and immigrant-owned businesses and other small businesses in our community. But it's rare that we get asked our opinion on the next economic development strategy plan for a city, or there are things that we are not invited to. And not only do we want to be at the tables, we want to help build the tables with all of you and other parts of our community, that we want to have representative leadership. It's very important. So I think whenever we can think from a perspective of bridge building, who is most impacted by this situation happening, who has the most potentially to lose, where can we reach out and bring these people into the conversations and co-create agendas together so that we're not feeling like we're an afterthought or have a minor role in something that impacts all of our lives. So I would say those are part of it. And then also borrowing, we have great models. Welcoming America puts out their Welcoming Economies playbook. It's incredible. We have the Seattle's Equitable Development Initiative, and hopefully King County will also be soon passing their proposal to create a King County initiative along those lines as well. So we have models that we can borrow from, innovations, and we have, again, that thought leadership leadership and expertise within our own communities that often go untapped.
Yeah. And kind of along those lines, Louis, I just want to turn back to you for a minute. What would you like to see done in terms of sort of helping to build more of those bridges to connect some of the smaller businesses and some of the Black-owned businesses with the rest of the community and the majority business, I guess?
Well, I think back to comment that Ed made early on. When the gaming industry got started, it was a bunch of white guys sitting around developing and in a circle. And I talked about the awareness now, and there are those that are out there saying, how can I help? It starts with, again, understanding what the problem is. There's a saying that when knowledge meets power, those that have the knowledge have not the power, those with the power have not the knowledge. And when there's an opportunity, like Debbie's saying, to be able to have a seat at the table. One thing comes to mind is an initiative that was put together by Perkins Coie and a couple of the law firms, the Black Boardroom Initiative. Mm-hmm. And it was a 7-month program that I, along with other African-American men, signed up for to participate in, be groomed so that we could be positioned to have a seat at the table at some of those boardrooms where in the past it's been, again, a bunch of white guys sitting around making decisions about policy that affect our communities. Mm-hmm. And now involving people from those communities to give a voice to some of the concerns and challenges that can be addressed. And it wasn't intentional, it was just, we do what we do. And so now having an initiative like that and more people that are aware that there needs to be more people at the table from our various communities and have a voice that can speak to some of the challenges and some of the concerns and have some solutions to present. I think it's going to be good. And I'm optimistic that there's enough people out there now that really want to understand, how can I make a difference? How can I be part of the solution?
Well, and I love the optimism, and I think that's fantastic, and that's what we all need. Sticking with sort of the theme of the sort of overall growth and evolution of the East Side, Jane, I want to turn to you for a minute on just sort of your thoughts on how can community leaders, both private sector and public, be more thoughtful and intentional about efforts to improve our communities when it comes to things such as infrastructure, transportation, affordable housing, and some of those important key issues.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll answer this from the perspective of what we're seeing on the East Side right now, and this unprecedented growth that is happening and attention that is focused in our region and on the 23 cities that we're calling East King County. I think one of the things that we've been really trying to think about is how do we, big we, the community at large on the East Side, how do we come together so that we are developing a vision and a set of strategies and a plan that is cohesive amongst all of East King County? Certainly every community is different and unique, but there are some things that we as a region need to come together on and develop a unified agenda. And it's the old saying, it's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that is absolutely something that we need to consider and think about right now on the East Side. And it's things like responsible growth. So how are we developing a unified agenda as we go to Olympia every year? How are we thinking about what is the best thing that ought to happen on the east? What are our priorities so that we're not in a position where we are challenging each other, but we are, going and advocating on behalf of all of us. The second piece of that, which is absolutely critical and follows along the discussion we've had today, is that changing who's at the table and making sure that as strategies and agendas are being built, that it is done so in a way that is inclusive of all the different geographies and demographics and races and genders and so forth of the people that live in this community. I think that is critically important. And then doing so in a way that we're also thinking about how do we take this moment of unprecedented growth and pause long enough to think about what do we want our community to be in 10 years and 15 years and 20 years, and make sure that we're thinking about that now so that we are building for that future as opposed to what's happening, tomorrow and the next day. I think that's going to be an important element for us as a community. You think about the East Side today, and I think there is a lack of arts and cultural institutions. I think there's a lack of services, or it's hard to find. The cohesiveness is not there in some of those attributes. So I think those are things that we need to think about as we move forward. How are we building for the future that this community really wants to be?
Yeah, and some of that goes towards that. The East Side communities do rank high for livability, but it's kind of looking at kind of the thinking in terms of more equitable services, helping schools to continue to improve and evolve. And as you mentioned, the arts and cultural opportunities on the East Side. What would you like to see? And I open this really to everyone as well. What would you like to see kind of moving forward to have a more kind of equitable opportunity to improve the livability of the communities overall on the East Side?
If I could talk
Go ahead.
a little about it, because I grew up here, I was born here. My parents both moved out here to work for Boeing, and I've seen a lot of change. I grew up in Bellevue and live in Kirkland now. It's such a complicated issue. It's, because I think we want to preserve what we love about this place, right? But we still have to deal with growth. And what does that mean? Or, what do we have to give up to make room for more people? And, I love that downtown Bellevue has become this, mini, city, skyscrapers. I'm really proud of that, honestly, that's this little town that I remember as being a small place as a kid is now this beautiful big city. But I love that Kirkland's different. I love that Kirkland still has kind of a little small town feel, and they do the little 4th of July parade, and so there isn't like one solution. One city can do one thing, one can do another. In my area where I live, part of the reason I moved out here and others is we just love the trees. We want to be in the trees. And we have our own organization, Finn Hill Neighborhood Alliance, and we try to protect what this neighborhood is. But if we're too greedy about that, in the sense, if we're too selfish about keeping it the way it is, we can't make room for others, right? And so we need higher density. We need more things to be built. But how do you make the trade-offs between those two things? I think it's a complicated issue, and it's one we're going to be navigating for quite a while.
Yep.
Debbie,
it's a great opportunity for this organization, honestly, is this One East Side, and having more entities like that are pulling people together to have these kinds of discussions, as opposed to one-offs in all the different places. Because you're right, Ed, it's like every community wants to have their own neighborhood feel and their own characteristics, for sure. But when it comes to things like infrastructure and access to services and density, and what are we going to do about homelessness, and what are we going to do about arts and culture, and these things that don't really have geographic boundaries. How do we ensure those kinds of things, there's a place for communities to come together and actually do regional planning? I think that's going to be the key.
Debbie, what are your thoughts around kind of how to improve the livability of the East Side for everyone?
These are tough questions today. Well, I want to say just a plug for an immediate and concrete part of this, which is our comprehensive plan updates coming up in our cities, and how critical it is that we hear from all parts of our community. So I'm going to be doing my part. I hope all of you will as well, to make sure that we hear from more people than we typically hear from in those processes of community engagement. But I do think, to Jane's point about the visioning, I would love for us to see more spaces, more convening spaces where it's cross-sector, cross-community engagement with one another about why we love this region so much and why we want to stay here and how we can preserve that, not just so that we can be here, but so many of us struggle when we're thinking about our children or grandchildren being able to afford to live here. That's not right. We shouldn't have to break up our families because of those dynamics. And we need to think about that longer term. And I really hope that we can all look at those spaces and each one try to host, if we each just hosted one, think about the amount of people we would touch and the amount of visioning that we can do together, and then point people to those very specific and concrete spaces where they can make an impact and voice their needs and solutions. And I'd like to just share really quickly a portion of resources that we have on our website, Resource Library for Inclusive Economy, for some thought leadership around that, if anyone is interested. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Louis, Matt, any thoughts that you might have just around kind of ways you'd like to see the sort of livability of the East Side improved going forward or maximized?
Sure. Oh, go ahead, Louis.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start with, I think a couple of points people have hit, I have concerns about also, which is really the affordability of our communities. And I think that, as we all want to live here and other people move in, a tendency is really to develop out more density in our communities. But for whatever reason, I don't feel like we're developing the density to support that with our arts and culture, with our nonprofits or small businesses. And a lot of the housing is going in for sure. And I think it was Debbie who mentioned it, that is a concern, which is how do our kids live here? Like the affordability, long term is just not here at the moment. And hopefully, I think as we start getting to hybrid and remote workspaces, we can distribute that a little bit more. And some of the smaller communities can become some of, a new Bellevue, as Ed was saying, like, how do these smaller communities evolve a little bit more to support this new remote workforce? It will change the dynamics quite a bit, but I still think affordability has to be one of the largest concerns.
Yeah. Louis, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Matt there. And as long as that's a desired goal, I think it can be achieved. And more times than not, when the planning process is underway, those that are impacted the most are not at the table or don't have a voice at the table. And again, I'm going to remain optimistic that there are more people now that are at that level of awareness that they understand change needs to happen. And enough blaming the victim. Mm-hmm. Let's support the victim, those that have been impacted. And again, as we talk about the East Side and the development of it, if there's no intention to make it affordable, it will never become affordable.
That's right.
So let's have those conversations. Let's establish that as a goal and get the right people at the table that can have that voice and have an understanding of what that need is, and then come up with solutions.
You know, Matt, but aside from the affordable housing affordability standpoint, I mean, what do you see in terms of sort of the opportunities and challenges for recruiting employees who can choose to live on the East Side or elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think Ed hit on the desire from the company, right? From a company perspective, we are now able to get the best no matter where they're located. And I think that's a really attractive piece. It's been a struggle for a lot of a lot of the tech sector before the pandemic to hire in locations. And I think even when you're trying to decide whether you're going to live on the East Side or Seattle, there's choices there, right? And people decide that where they're working based on that decision pre-pandemic. I think now remote work and hybrid work is a competitive offer, just like what location you might look at. And so it's very important. And I think the next piece of this opportunity is, what is that at-home workforce? And I think Lewis mentioned how Zelles was able to adapt to some of that at-home workforce. And there's going to be a new need for services and support, community support, cultural support around at-home work. And it is permanent. Like, there is going to be a hybrid workforce. There is going to be people, maybe 50% in the office. There's going to be full remote workforce where people are at home all the time and never go into the office. And the home office is going to change. The home needs are going to change, and the services around that are going to change. And I don't think we're fully supportive of that yet, but there's a lot of opportunities available, both from a technology perspective to a small business perspective, co-office locations, co-location opportunities inside the communities. Even maybe transforming what the local coffee shop is about. Like, there's so many pieces here, and I think these are really the opportunities. And recruiting people has gotten more complicated because really people are now choosing the company more than they're choosing the location. And I actually think that's really good for business.
And so, Ed, just to go back to you for a minute. So along those lines, you talked about your fund and you're investing in companies around the globe, really getting sort of that top talent wherever they may live. How can we as a region utilize that same principle for innovation and collaboration for investment in the future?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. One, I think that what we've done with our fund, with One Up Ventures, it happens to be in the game business, but there's no reason it has to be in the game business. I hope that other people look at what we do as a model to, encourage diversity and create community, in other areas. I think it can be done, and I think if we continue to show good performance with the fund, it'll encourage other people to do the same. So that's one thing I hope. Just kind of a comment, to what Matt was talking about. I know, I think one of the great things about the pandemic is that we can drive again on the roads. So there are some big challenges we were facing pre-pandemic, with traffic and not wanting to become the next LA. That hybrid work can really help us. It can really make our lives better, I think, in a bunch of ways. So I think that what Matt said is exactly right, and I think we shouldn't be afraid of it. I think we should embrace it, and it's going to solve a bunch of problems for us. So.
And real quick, Ed, just share with us, why has the East Side become such a hub for gaming industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, I didn't really talk about the game business. East Side is, just this region, Puget Sound region, is one of the best places to make video games in the whole world. And the game business has been the fastest growing media business for quite a while, growing about 10% year over year. Pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, was growing 20% year over year. And it's a $200 billion business and continuing to grow. So we live in kind of the Hollywood of the games business. Us game people, maybe we don't make as much a big deal about that as the Hollywood people do. So maybe you don't realize you're living in the middle of an incredible game place, but there's 1,000 people working at Bungie down in downtown Bellevue, or they were. They just got acquired for $3.5 billion by Sony. You've got Valve there, which is another multi-billion-dollar company right there in the center of downtown Bellevue. Of course, we have Microsoft, and Microsoft's huge game business. They just did the largest acquisition in the company history. It was a game company. And so that was encouraging to me, so that Microsoft is continuing to grow and invest in that business. And of course, Nintendo, like I said. So, but yeah, the roots of the game business go way back here, run very deep. And I think it's because, you basically had a lot of engineers from Boeing, and you got some very early game companies here. Sierra is an example of a company that was here. Electronic Arts had an office, and then of course Nintendo and Microsoft. So it's all grown from that. Now we have, Christina and I think there's about 500 game companies in the local region. And these days game companies can be 2 people, husband and wife team, up to 1,000 people at Bungie. So working on Destiny. So it's a great business, and it's a business that has a technology aspect and an art aspect, and so we've been able to bring a lot of art people into the community as well. So I think it's had a very positive impact on the region.
Yeah, well, we have just a couple minutes left, so I want to end with Lewis's optimism. I love that, and so just 30 seconds or less. I'm going to have each of you just give us one thing that gives you optimism for the future, particularly focusing on the East Side. So, Lewis, start us off.
Well, just being on this panel today, and the vibe, the good energy, and again, more conversations like this. And maybe, I can get Ed's contact information now and talk to him.
Absolutely.
Get him to invest into this nonprofit that I serve on a board to teach some of the inner city kids how to become gamers and how to learn programming, and make that investment into the community. But again, having an opportunity to network and meet others that have the same vision is optimistic for me. And a lot of good energy here today, a lot of good information, meeting good people, and we come together and make a difference.
Great. Debbie, quickly, just in 10 seconds, 20 seconds.
I would say our people, our communities, and our relationships give me hope.
Great. Jane.
I think that for me, it's this whole conversation, and the word that kept coming up for me is intentionality, and the notion that, we need to be intentional about having all people represented at the table. We need intentionality about creating having a vision about what the future is that we want, and then building it in time. So that's what I'm excited about.
Great. Ed.
Mine's a little funny. One of our portfolio companies happened to be based in Seattle, put out an announcement of their company, and it happened to be all white guys in the picture, and they got beat up. They got beat up in Twitter. They got beat up online. And I was like, that's so great. We're at a time where that's not okay in our business anymore, that the community stepped up and says, no, you need to do better, So I love that.
Great. Matt, close it out, 10 seconds.
Sure. Yeah, I'm gonna follow Lewis here, which is I'm just excited that we're able to have these conversations, able to have support from people like One Redmond and Eastside community things to get these conversations going. And so super excited about that, super optimistic, and looking forward to continuing these conversations.
Great. Well, we are out of time, so I want to turn it back over to Christina. I want to thank each of you. It's been a pleasure taking part in this conversation with you. And thank you, Christina, for having me be involved as well.
Absolutely. And a big thank you from me to all of you for not only your insight, but your inspiration and your dedication to our community. Thank you. So as we look to the future of OneEastside, building and sustaining our local economy that is inclusive to all will be achieved by working together to ensure our region is an excellent place to do business, to work, and to live. We will weave that quality of life fabric of our community through economic development. And as many of you know, Stronger Together has been our theme for well before the pandemic. And to support our ongoing efforts, we are launching a capital campaign later this year to bring business, government, education together to resource this work to our community. And before we leave, I want to give another reminder to please help get the word out to our nonprofits about the Give Big Eastside opportunity. We'll be hosting an informational session on March 15th to walk through how nonprofits can participate. And we also encourage everyone here and businesses and individuals to engage in the Give Big Eastside campaign, which will be coming out in May. By donating to our recognized nonprofits, but maybe also in addition to our smaller and less visible nonprofits that are making a difference in our community each and every day. And I want to also make sure that you please share the news about OneEastside Spark far and wide so all our businesses who need help can find it. And as we move forward through to recovery from this lengthy pandemic, remember that we are all in this together. As our businesses navigate this new normal, they will be choosing their own COVID policies for the safety of their staff and patrons. And that will include those that may have compromised immune system. So as Washington State Department of Health so eloquently put it, please be kind and compassionate and respect the rules of the room that you are in. So as I close the program today, I want to go ahead and give a big thank you to all our presenters again. Oh my gosh, what a wonderful, wonderful presentation today. Thank you to our sponsors, our presenting sponsors and founding level investors, Microsoft, the City of Redmond, and Nelson Legacy Group. Our supporting sponsors, Business Health Trust, BHT, and our media sponsors, the Puget Sound Business Journal. And I would like to also thank the team at Tenacious Ventures for another outstanding production here today. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next event.